Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about none other than the OnePlus 8 and see how this phone holds up in 2021. Now this phone just came out not too long ago, but we are pretty much getting that, OnePlus 9 and OnePlus 9 Pro very soon. So it's worth talking about, it's worth mentioning, and it's so crazy. This phone is almost a year old coming up next month, and it does not feel like it. I cannot believe it's already been a year since this phone's been out almost. Now, I will tell you this phone is a killer device in so many different ways, but some things have changed, some markets have changed, some prices have gotten cheaper that are about the same price as this one. So we'll get into all that in a second, but if you want to pick up this phone or any other phones that I'd recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there for the cheapest prices that I find and help support the channel at the same time. Now looking at the front, the OnePlus 8 has that 6.55-inch Fluid AMOLED display, and it's a 90Hz panel. And as I mentioned before, this panel itself was actually a really good panel. OnePlus has been taking a lot of chances. It sounds like I'm sponsored from them, or not at all, but OnePlus, I think ever since the OnePlus 6T has been making some pretty good panels for sure. And this panel is no exception. Even though it's only Full HD, it's only 1080p, it still looks good. I really don't have too many complaints about it. It's a hole punch display. Now it does have a little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, and at first I was like, maybe it's a little bit too big of a bezel, whatever. It's not the case at all. The images, to be honest, don't match up with how it looks in real life, in my opinion, and in real life it definitely looks far better than how it looks in pictures, which is so crazy to say. And it helps that it does have that 90Hz refresh rate, so I think that's another really cool addition that this specific tablet has. Now it does have that USB Type-C port on the bottom, which is great, and on the back, this is also my favorite part about this phone. It has that frosted glass back. This by far is one of my favorite things about this phone. The jump from the OnePlus 7 or probably the OnePlus 7T Pro to the OnePlus 8 was a ginormous difference in terms of the back. I wasn't really too much of a fan of the back of the OnePlus 7T Pro or the OnePlus 7 Pro, but this device with that frosted glass back looks so good, and it definitely is one of my favorite things about this device. Now you also have that triple camera setup on the back. The feeling of the phone though, when you feel it in the hands, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite things about this phone. It just feels so good, and I think for sure the feeling in the hand itself is a humongous asset for this phone. Now I do have to hit on the cameras, and I'm not embarrassed to hit on them. I think they're good enough for the most part. I am excited to see what OnePlus brings with the OnePlus 9 and OnePlus 9 Pro, because they are hyping up that camera like crazy, dude. If that camera isn't good, that is one step further into OnePlus kind of changing up something else that needs to be changed, but it's also one more area where they could flop at. I hope it's not a flop because I love OnePlus, but they've taken kind of a little bit of an L internally from basically everything that we've been hearing on all the leaks and stuff, but also the software side of things by changing it a little bit more like One UI. But again, we'll see what happens when we get further and further, like Android 12, Android 13 kind of side of things. But this camera is a triple camera setup, 48 megapixel wide angle lens, 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor, then a 2 megapixel macro lens. Now, I do think this camera really isn't even that bad. I think it's a pretty solid camera for sure, but the problem is that the front camera, and I'll get into the front camera in a second. Now, I'm glad it has that, wide angle lens and ultra wide sensor. I do wish it had a telephoto lens, but it's okay. We have that macro lens, which really doesn't even do anything super crazy, to be honest, at least in the day-to-day use case that I use it. But that wide angle lens is actually not bad. You can do 4K at 60. You have features built into the camera which are actually pretty good as well, and I think for sure the camera itself is actually pretty decent. It definitely is not the best camera of 2020. I would 100% give that to the S20 Ultra, but I think this camera, for it not necessarily being a camera focused phone, is actually a solid lens. Now it's not my favorite camera. I think I would rate it below an 11 Pro, but I do think it's still a pretty decent thing. If you want to go ahead and take, quick photos or videos, you're probably going to have still a tremendous experience. I don't think that ultra wide sensor is that amazing, but again, the wide angle lens pretty much makes up for it. The front, on the other hand, with that 16 megapixel wide angle lens, this is the biggest problem. Only 1080p on this specific lens, and that is something that's very annoying. This thing came on in 2020, and that's the same year that the iPhone 12s all had 4K at 60 on the front. So I love how OnePlus is, mentioning and talking a ton about their, back of their camera and the Hasselblad, collaboration and stuff. But if that front camera, they have not made any mention of the front camera. If that front camera is still 1080p, if it's not 4K at 60, In my head, that's going to be a total L for the camera. A lot of people are complaining about the, back camera, but a lot more people are complaining about the front camera, in my opinion. I think that's a bigger deal. So I guess we'll see what happens, but hopefully OnePlus can make some improvement there. But in terms of the camera, that's pretty much how I see it for this specific device. Now moving on to, as I mentioned, one of the best things about this phone. This is by far my favorite thing about this device, the software. This is my favorite version of Android, even with the little changes that OnePlus has done for Android 11, the things I don't like. I still would prefer this over stock Android just because of the amount of features that are built in. This has always been one of my favorite versions of Android, but at first I was in denial early on because I was like, no, stock Android is the best. That's not the case. Oxygen OS, in my opinion, is the best one. But on top of that, there's a software longevity and the roots and custom ROMs that are available for this thing, or that are going to be available for this thing once this phone's lifespan is done, is going to be awesome. And I love seeing those types of things. The software itself is very stock, so you don't really even have too many problems there. And just the whole entire atmosphere of this device is a humongous asset. And as I mentioned before, when you have a device like this, you're definitely going to be feeling like it's a solid, device. So you're not going to feel like it's outdated. You're not going to feel like it's super old. And as I mentioned, that is one of my favorite things about this phone is the software, and it still completely holds up in 2021. But on top of that, the battery life on this phone is still really good as well. You have a 4300 mAh battery inside of it, which is a massive size battery on this thing. It doesn't have any wireless charging or reverse wireless charging, which is very stupid. I don't know why it doesn't have it, but I do think that size of the battery is a humongous asset. It is such a large battery, you can realistically do anything you want with it. And I think, for day-to-day use, the fact that the display isn't 120Hz 1440p, it's a 90Hz 1080p, that helps into the overall, battery life of it. But also the fact that it's stock for the most part, it doesn't have a lot of crazy bloatware in the background. I think this device's battery life and the software are two of the most important things that this phone 100% has going for it. So in terms of that, thumbs up for me for sure in this specific area. Now ending it off with the performance, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 650 GPU, and 8 gigs of RAM on the base model, and then 12 gigs of RAM on the top tier model. And again, this is another one of those areas where this phone just kills it in. Now first of all, as always, basic things that you're going to do, basic tasks, different things like that, you're going to be perfectly fine. I really don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. I think everyone's going to, kind of be expected to what to know about it. But I think even going up to the next set of apps too, you're going to be perfectly fine in this specific case as well. Again, time after time, you're never really going to experience too many issues when it comes down to the whole entire performance side of things. But again, if you try to take it up a notch and go to the heavier intensive games, the heavier intensive apps, video editing a ton, split screen multitasking, all that stuff, this is also going to be another specific area where it's going to just knock out of the park. You're going to have a really good time with it. I really can't think of too many areas where this specific device just doesn't kill it in. Maybe specifically if you're trying to split screen multitask a ton and you have that 8GB model, that may be the only area that I can think of where this phone is going to hang up at. And especially if you're comparing it to something like the Galaxy S21 or the S21 Ultra, you're not going to be getting as fast, loading speeds or anything like that. But for the most part, you should be able to get pretty comparable, performance. And I think that's great. If this thing isn't as expensive as those devices right now, it's still not a cheap phone by any means, but it's still a pretty good phone. And paired up with the software and the battery, I think it's a solid, phone for sure when it comes down to it. So in terms of that covers up the performance. And to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up a OnePlus 8 in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you. I think the OnePlus 8 is still completely worth it in 2021. I think it's a solid phone for sure. There's really not that much to hate on it. As I mentioned over and over and over again, this is a solid phone with a solid chipset, with a solid battery, with a pretty okay camera. And as I mentioned, this phone is almost perfect in so many different ways, but there are a couple areas where it does drop the ball at, and I'm just like, why? Why doesn't have, these specific things? If it had these specific things, it would have been perfect. Things like IP certification. It may be, water repellent in some ways, I don't know, but there is no IP certification for it, so that is really annoying. The camera on the back is pretty good, but the front camera just isn't that great. It's definitely not, top 5 cameras of the year, especially last year. There's no way, it's just not gonna. I think the Galaxy S20 FE had a better camera, to be honest. And the front camera of this thing is just a flop. 1080p, that's totally unacceptable in 2020, especially now in 2021. That is something I really don't like. And no wireless charging or reverse wireless charging. Those are things that are very, very annoying, and to a lot of people may be deal breakers. to me, I feel like the camera is one of those things that I'm not a huge fan of, but I think every other thing about this device I could probably get by. So I think this phone is still completely worth it in 2021. I think it's a great phone for sure for the price tag, but I will say, if you want to wait, I would recommend waiting for the OnePlus 9 if it's not already out by you watching this. But on top of that also, Samsung Galaxy S20 I think is a great device, and it sucks that it's not, the software god that like OnePlus is, but I think for sure the Galaxy S20 is another phone I would probably recommend. The Pixel 5 is another phone I'd recommend, but the OnePlus 8 is a solid phone for sure. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.